Barbara Webber formed a very important part of my professional life and career development. She was the assistant superintendent at the Brompton when I first worked there in the early 1970s. And the two of us clicked immediately with our love for investigating physiotherapy techniques and expectations of high clinical practice. And it was wonderful going back in the late 1970s to be able to work with her on the studies I have mentioned. At that stage, in the late 1970s, she was working on the fourth, probably, edition of the Brompton Hospital Guide to Chest Physiotherapy. And it was an experience, a lovely experience for me, to assist with that just from the sidelines and in the background. When I returned to the Brompton permanently, i.e. until retirement, that was in 1986, but the time had come to stop moving between, or continuing to move between New Zealand and the UK, so this was to be a permanent move. There was the possibility of a textbook, and a draft outline had been drawn up. It was to be called Respiratory Care, and it was with Miss Diana Gaskell for a very long period of time, and she didn't have the opportunity to do it herself. And I was eventually invited to undertake this project, which was an enormous project for me at that point in time. But supported by Barbara Webber, we were able to approach, it was to be multi-author, authors from different parts of the world who had special expertise in the different areas of respiratory physiotherapy, which we wanted to highlight. And the publisher, from memory, was Harcourt Brace. I say from memory because these publishers keep changing over the years as they're taken over by one company and then by another. But we did manage to complete this text. And it was following that I was invited to do a bigger cardiorespiratory textbook. This put me in a slightly difficult position because it was not something that I would do to compete against the Brompton Hospital Guide to Chest Physiotherapy. But Barbara and I discussed this, and we felt it was probably the time to move on and to do an international textbook along these lines. We needed to discuss it with Diana Gaskell, and we also needed to discuss it with the general manager of the hospital, Mr. John Plant. Today his title would be that of Chief Executive. But we were still in the days when the Brompton was a big family hospital and everyone knew everyone else. And the Chief Executive knew not only all his physiotherapists, but also the cleaning ladies. It was a wonderful environment. John Plant's concern was that it would not be the Brompton Bible, as the Brompton book had become known. But he did agree that we were moving on, there was expertise from physiotherapists and from doctors who had been trained at the Brompton and had set up their own centres of excellence, nationally and internationally. And it was finally agreed that the Brompton Hospital Guide to Physiotherapy would end, and we would do the first edition of physiotherapy for respiratory and cardiac problems. It was Barbara Webber, of course, who had the expertise. I was very much a novice, and as you will be aware, she very appropriately was first editor, and I came in as second. And we were able to use our wonderful international network to invite authors from specialities within cardiorespiratory physiotherapy. It was comforting to learn that John Plant was very pleased with the way this went forward, and we did dedicate our first book to him, and it was still always associated with the Brompton. To our astonishment, that went into a second, third and fourth edition. Amni Prasad joining me when Barbara Webber retired, although needless to say, Barbara Webber was still giving us a hand with proofreading right up until the fourth edition, which was much appreciated. Working with Barbara was always very stimulating, and the hours would just fly by. A lot of our work couldn't be done between 9 and 5, and we didn't try to do it between 9 and 5. A lot of it took place in the evenings and at weekends. But the job satisfaction from that and the contacts that we made were just invaluable and generated so much job satisfaction. In the early days, of course, preparing a lecture had to be done weeks in advance because the slides would have to go to medical illustrations, and if you wanted to change your mind at the last minute, you couldn't. You had to either omit that slide or just cope with it as it was. The advent of PowerPoint considerably reduced the time spent actually preparing the presentation of the lecture, although the preparation was the same. There were many courses that we set up together, and the respiratory care course and advanced respiratory care course run from the Brompton Hospital were both in existence when I returned in the late 1980s. But I did join the team as a tutor and took over the respiratory care course when Barbara Webber retired. But at this stage we were moving into the era of the degree, and it became more appropriate for the respiratory care course to turn into a Masters of Advanced Cardiorespiratory Physiotherapy. And we had the opening through Anne Thompson at University College London to parallel the respiratory arm of a master's course with her musculoskeletal course. And Anne gave us tremendous help in the setting up of this course. Physiotherapists, as I have indicated, were entering the degree population, which is very appropriate and very necessary, but I would hesitate to, and would be sorry to see, physiotherapy become a doctoral profession in its entirety. There is a place for the doctorate, and those openings are there already, but we still need the physiotherapist who is not quite as academic, but can communicate beautifully with the patient and has clinical expertise. So there is a place for both and will remain so.